It's time! It's that time of the month. Boruto leaks are out. Genuinely never in my life would I think, oh, the 16th of every month. Obviously, my favorite day. And yet, the 16th or the 17th of every month, I get to sit down and see what 40-page masterpiece Kishimoto has been cooking up over the last 29 days. And every single time for roughly the last 2 years, I've sat down and consumed absolute fire. I mean, I'm just sitting down to a hot dinner of flames and scooping it into my eyeballs. And this month was absolutely no different. And as somebody who's eaten the same thing for breakfast for the last 5 years, trust me when I say I can eat the same meal once a month for the rest of my life. Because chapter 10 of Boruto had a little bit of everything. It had a semi-important character of the story get absolutely skewered and made a tree ornament, the explanation of why Himawari is now the Jinchuriki of Kurama, the reveal of her Kurama mode, and the possible reveal that she's already a Baryon mode level threat, a clear tie between Himawari and Kushina, the reveal that Himawari might have a better affinity for Kurama than Naruto ever did, a fated battle between Hidari and Sarada just starting, and Sarada revealing to all of us that she is not to be trifled with. See, well, chapter 10 is absolutely a fight-heavy chapter as opposed to a plot-heavy chapter. That's because for the last 9 chapters, we've been building up towards this kind of moment. The Shinju had to be created, their targets had to be selected, they had to make a move on those targets, and we had to possibly see an upgrade to those people that were being targeted in order to make them relevant in battle against the Shinju. And now that all of the pieces are in place, the true fun gets to begin. Not that everything that's happened before this wasn't also true fun, but we now get to see all of the chess pieces begin to meet in the middle of the board. And it's not going super well for Konoha. But enough of the teaser section of this video, let's dive directly in because today we're talking chapter 10 of Boruto Explained. Before we get to explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you love the idea of me breaking down some of your other favorite manga, go ahead and follow my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where instead of talking about Naruto and Boruto, I talk all other anime and manga. And if you just like the idea of me talking about anime and manga, go ahead and follow my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. To get into all that today, we gotta talk about my favorite recurring sponsor to the page, Betterhelp. Listen, I'm a big fan of anything I sponsor on this page, but out of all the things that I've sponsored on this page, nothing has played a bigger role in my life than Betterhelp. There's been times in my life that I've dealt with serious bouts of depression, mostly tied into the fact that my social media isn't popping off quite like it used to. However, because of Betterhelp, I was able to get connected with a therapist in under 48 hours after listing the problems that I was having, and the therapist that I was connected to was tailored to the problems that I was having. They helped me establish positive feedback loops and daily affirmations to help myself realize that I'm a lot more than my social media presence. And BetterHelp is offering you an experience similar to mine. See, we all have individual struggles, and BetterHelp wants to help you with those individual struggles. So simply by filling out your information and telling BetterHelp what's ailing you, BetterHelp is able to, most of the time, get you connected with a therapist within 48 hours. And the reason they're able to do this is because BetterHelp has a network of thousands of licensed mental health professionals that can help you with what's ever going on in your life. Which means, even if you're not exactly vibing with a therapist that you get connected to with first, you can switch to a new therapist at no extra cost and with no hassle. And since BetterHelp is committed to the whole no hassle strategy, you can also communicate with your therapist in a myriad of different ways tailored to your enjoyment. Be that phone calls, video calling, or even just exchanging messages. All to make sure you're as comfortable as possible when consulting with your therapist. And to get access to this incredible network of therapists, all you have to do is use my link, betterhelp.com/nchammer, and fill out a questionnaire, and boom, you'll be matched with a professional with years of experience dealing with the problems you're having. It's the easiest possible way to get connected with a therapist today. So go ahead, go to betterhelp.com/nchammer23, or use the link in my description to get started with your BetterHelp account today. And if you use my link to sign up for BetterHelp today, you'll receive a special discount on your first month. So what are we waiting for? Let's start prioritizing the important things. So, Himawari is the Jinchuriki of Kurama, and is possibly a better one than even her father, who we now might be able to realize actually never had that much affinity with Kurama in the first place, but rather was able to brute force a connection with Kurama because of the power of his chakra and the power of Kurama's chakra. The mere existence of Naruto's KCM modes actually having a physical layer over Naruto might actually indicate the fact that Naruto and Kurama weren't working together, or at least as together as they could could be. That is to say that the clear separation between Naruto and Kurama's chakra manifesting as a chakra layer around Naruto is a possible indicator that they actually weren't that collaborative in how they burnt up their chakra, which could mean we haven't yet seen the true strength of a Kurama Jinchuriki. That is, of course, until now. But that realization is until very deep in the chapter, and it's also a theory we're gonna probably have to talk about in a separate video. Because today, we simply just need to focus on what happened in chapter 10 of Boruto. As today, we need to break down what happened, what minor details you might have missed, and also the theories that could spin out of this chapter. And thus, let's start this video off in the way that we tend to start these kinds of videos off, at the beginning. See, chapter 10 starts off where chapter 9 left off, with Team 10 and Himawari on a giant drawn bird flying away from the likes of Jura and Hidari. And they're making pretty good time. Because mind you, the ability of flight is actually rather rare in the Naruto universe, as only those who are able to draw birds, summon birds, or float using light boulder weight jutsu were able to fly prior to the existence of Otsutskis. And thus Inojin sweeping Team 10 away with Himawari is pretty much as fast as they could have gotten away from that situation. But apparently Inojin's best isn't enough, because as the four of them make their way away from Hidari and Jura on this giant hawk, Jura says they should know that running is futile. But then Jura realizes, oh, maybe they wanted to fly away to make sure that the battlefield was no longer Konoha to minimize damage. Now it's at this point that the adult B squad shows up to confront Jura and Hidari. And by the adult B squad, I mean Konohamaru and a bunch of no-name Jonin. Well, not necessarily like no-name Jonin, as it's Konohamaru and then the Jonin we've seen used for the tracking of Kawaki and Boruto when they were in the village together. The Jonin who were positioned outside of the Uzumaki household, making sure Kawaki and Boruto didn't go anywhere. Now, when Konohamaru gets to the scene, he checks in with Shikamaru and says, "This is Konohamaru here. I can confirm the presence of 2 intruders." But he then tells Shikamaru that there's no sign of Team 10. It's at this point that Shikamaru tells Konohamaru, don't worry about it, they're heading southwest to lure Jura away from Konoha. He then tells Konohamaru that Jura and Hidari are looking for Himawari, even though they can't necessarily understand why. But Shikamaru sends this message out to somebody else as well, and that somebody else is Kawaki, who rather interestingly responds to this information in the way an actual good brother would, with like fear and alertness. The second he hears Himawari is in danger, he switches his objective from Boruto to her safety. But speaking of Boruto, we get a panel of him camping out somewhere in Konoha, trying to get his karma marking to come back in. Shikamaru then tells Kawaki to disengage from Boruto, as he believes that Boruto is also enemies with Jura and Hidari. I mean, Shikamaru knows this, but he's trying to play it cool for Kawaki. And thus Shikamaru says, let's use Boruto's strength, go try and find Himawari. To which Kawaki responds with, hey, Lord Eighth, if Himawari's ever in danger again, tell me sooner, shithead. This is why I love the fan translations, because they always put the actual swears they put in Japanese, but in the English official translations, they're like, oh, doo-doo head. And Kawaki, once again, kind of like a good brother, realizing that Himawari is in danger, immediately begins to fly to her location, leaving, once again, Delta in the dust, who chases after it. We then cut back to Boruto, who's having a conversation with Shikamaru, who's apparently talking to everybody in the village. I'm surprised his lines never get crossed up. And Shikamaru asks Boruto, are you okay? To which Boruto responds by, yeah, I am. I just need a second to rest. But we can see that Boruto is actually very visually distressed, and so is the Kashin Koji Toad that's along with him. And while this doesn't tell us a whole lot about why Boruto can't use his karma marking, it speaks to the level of severity with which both Boruto and Kashin Koji approach Momoshiki possibly manifesting through the medium of his karma marking. So it is definitely something to keep an eye on. We then cut back to Hidari, who's facing down against the B squad of Jonin. Hidari then asks Jura, why do these guys want to get involved with us? To which Jura responds with, well, I guess we'll have to ask them ourselves. Well, I guess you'll have to ask them yourselves, because I am going to chase after Himawari. At which point, Jura just flies away, and the B squad of Jonin can do literally nothing about it, because remember, flight, super rare in Naruto. But Konohamaru identifies that Jura's heading southwest, towards Himawari, so he tells the B squad of Jonin, let's follow him. But Hidari isn't gonna let that happen. Hidari then asks the B squad if they have any business with him or Jura, which confuses the B squad because they're like, you're the trespasser here, which once again, Hidari doesn't really understand. He's kind of new to the whole thing of being sentient. However, over the duration of this conversation, Konohamaru realizes that Hidari sounds a whole lot like Sasuke. And somewhat interestingly, this is the first time we've ever gotten a confirmation that the Shinju sound like the people they're copied from. I mean, I guess that makes sense, I just never was told. And so Konohamaru checks in with the sensory squad because apparently everybody's connected to everybody at all points nowadays and says, this guy sounds exactly like Sasuke, can we confirm whether or not it is in fact Sasuke? At which point the sensory unit tells him, yeah, the person in front of you has an exact chakra match to that of Sasuke. But before Konohamaru and the rest of the B squad can get their skin peeled off by Hidari, who breaks onto the scene other than Sarada and Sumire. The double S's, never mind, that's historically problematic. Unless, of course, you're a Camaro. For some reason. Anyway, Sarada and Sumire emerge from the dust of the scuffle, and it's at this point that Hidari sees Sarada and says, Sarada, Chiha. It's at this point that Hidari then disappears into a set of claw marks, and more claw marks appear around Sarada and Sumire, which very clearly shows to us that Hidari and probably the rest of the Shinju have the ability to use the claw marks, which we kind of already knew because that's how they got to Konoha, but it had never been like truly confirmed. Now, what is interesting about Hidari using these claw marks, however, is the fact that he doesn't throw them like Code does. They just simply appear, which means for the Shinju, more likely than not, they're probably tied to their Rinnegan, which seem to have a myriad of very interesting abilities. But regardless of how the claw marks get there in the first place, Hidari pops up behind Sarada, his hand poised to land a Chidori. And without the usage of any hand signs whatsoever, Hidari activates a Chidori and lunges it in Sarada's general direction. However, in response to this Chidori hurtling its way towards Sarada, she activates her 3-Tome Sharingan and says, weave, quite literally almost hitting a death drop to avoid this Chidori. She then, while almost parallel with the ground, twists her body, activates her own Chidori, and cuts through the side of Hidari's stomach, which we need to talk about how impressive that is. Hidari dodged a surprise attack in the form of chakra rods from Kawaki. Sasuke with his EMS and 6-Tome Rinnegan could not react to Ishiki's chakra rods. And if we're to assume that Ishiki and Kawaki's chakra rods travel at a similar speed, this means that Hidari would scale above EMS Sasuke in terms of reaction speed. Now, mind you, EMS Sasuke also knew these chakra rods were coming. He was actively engaging in combat against Ishiki, but the chakra rods fired at Hidari were a surprise attack. Now, you can make the argument that Kawaki isn't as strong as Ishiki until the day you die, but there is genuinely no evidence to substantiate that claim. Kawaki is the wielder of a fully manifested karma marking that has all of Ishiki's battle experience and abilities. And while there's definitely theories out there that are stating that because Amado's daughter's DNA is imprinted in this karma that it's actually slowly but surely making Kawaki back into a human, once again, that's just a theory. It's not substantiated. And thus Sarada not only being able to dodge a surprise attack she didn't know was coming, as she had just wandered onto a battlefield hoping to help Konohamaru and whatever was going on with him, but also on top of dodging that surprise attack, launch a counterattack that hits a guy who was able to dodge an Ishiki level attack that he didn't see coming is a wild, not only reaction time, but also speed feat for Sarada. Now, the blow that she lands to Hidari's chest is not fatal. It's more of a grazing blow, but it does lead Sarada to start asking some questions, as she thinks just now, the movie just used, that was Chidori, and there's only 2 people on Earth who can use Chidori, me and my father, which begins to scare Sarada as she asks Hidari, just what are you? We then cut back to the somehow more hype other plotline running simultaneously with Sarada battling against Hidari, which is Himawari talking to Kurama. And when we cut back to them, we see that they're still inside of Himawari's subconscious. And Kurama's telling Himawari, I am Kurama. I'm also sometimes referred to as Ninetales, but you can call me whatever you want. To which Himawari responds by saying, Kurama, aren't you the fox that was always with my father? Why are you here? Also, now that we're talking about it, what exactly is here? To which Kurama explains by saying that here isn't necessarily a place. It's an extension of both of our subconsciousness where we can meet. And it's at this point that Kurama says something very interesting. He says right now, the 2 of us are of one mind and one body. And while you could look at this as an absolute throwaway statement, as yes, obviously they're of one mind and one body, Kurama exists inside of Himawari and they're talking inside of their collective subconscious, I believe there's actually something more important being stated here. See, Kurama and Naruto started their relationship as 2 very separate entities. See, while Kurama did technically exist inside of Naruto, Kurama existed inside of Naruto inside of a cage, purposely kept separate from Naruto for the majority of his life. And thus, while they might have been of one body, were they really? Because if enough of Kurama's chakra was able to leak outside of Naruto's 8-trigram seal, Kurama was able to re-manifest his own body. And thus, it was less like they were of one body and more like they were like one body inside inside of another body trying to get out. But Kurama specifically tells Himawari that they are of one mind and one body, implying to me a higher level of collaboration between Himawari and Kurama than Naruto and Kurama, and that's corroborated further on in the chapter. We then cut to outside of Himawari and Kurama, where Team 10 is trying to wake Himawari up, as by popping into her subconscious, she is now unconscious. But waking up Himawari isn't really their only big challenge right now, because Jura's closing in. And I'll tell you right now, he looks like a chicken in the air. And presumably because Team 10 doesn't want to get killed by the tree alien, Shikadai is screaming at the sensory unit to send as much help as they can immediately. We then cut back to Himawari's subconscious, where she's asking, why is this happening? What is all of this? To which Kurama explains to her, it's as you've already said. I used to be with your father, but during our battle against Ishiki, the flame of my life burnt out. And then Kurama goes on to explain the circumstances of his death. And the way that Kurama describes his death and therefore subsequent revival is, one, not only greatly simplified, but two, not exactly what we would have anticipated. See, because like I've already said, Kurama admitted during his battle against Ishiki, the flame of his life burnt out. That is to say that he expended all of his chakra and died. But Kurama then says something rather interesting, and that is, for us Bijou, death doesn't last forever. He says, even if our physical bodies and souls are extinguished, our components still remain. We will always resurrect somewhere. Which for those of you who know anything about Bijou and tailed beasts, makes perfect sense. That's been explained to us multiple times. If a Jinchuriki is killed while still being a Jinchuriki, their tailed beast will re-manifest somewhere because their chakra still exists. We knew that, and we've known it for a while. But the circumstances of Baryon mode were supposed to be slightly different. See, the circumstances of Baryon mode was supposed to be that it essentially operates like nuclear fusion, kind of like how the sun works. Two different energies are supposed to come together, collide, and make a heavier element, and thus release energy. And the energy created by the collision of these two sources of energy is what was supposed to create Baryon mode. And thus, since the energy of Naruto and the energy of Kurama was colliding to create this new form of energy, the energy isn't necessarily being destroyed, it should have been changed to no longer represent either Naruto or Kurama's chakra, but instead a different kind of Baryon-based energy that Naruto would expend in his Baryon mode. But what Kurama is essentially telling us here is that after the usage of Baryon mode, his chakra still existed, his components still remained. But for Kurama's components to still remain, that would mean either one of two things happened. Either this heightened form of energy that resulted in Baryon mode was still considered Kurama's components, and therefore that energy could recirculate on Earth and eventually revive Kurama, or the energy that was collided in order to create Baryon mode in the first place was able to eventually separate and return back to its lower energy form. And once that Baryon energy had separated and returned to its lower form, Kurama's chakra was able to regather. And if either of those explanations are true, there is massive plot repercussions from both of those realities. See, if this higher version of energy that was used to create Baryon mode was then, after the usage of Baryon mode, considered to be the remains of Kurama, that would mean the version of Kurama we're seeing inside of Himawari is built essentially out of Baryon mode energy, which would make this, even though it's a smaller version of Kurama, the strongest version of Kurama we've ever seen. However, if the second possibility is what happened and the Baryon energy was able to separate back into its key components, its lower energy forms, this would mean that Baryon mode is not only reusable, but also Naruto should get back any and all chakra he lost by using it. In fact, this might mean that the usage of Baryon mode didn't actually cost Naruto any chakra at all. See, because while Sakura says after treating Naruto after his battle against Ishiki that he no longer has superhuman chakra and can't spam the attacks he used to be able to spam, and therefore people like me came to the conclusion that Naruto, on top of losing Kurama, also lost a fair chunk of his own chakra, Sakura could have just been referring to the fact that he no longer has Kurama, or the Baryon energy that was dissipated into the universe through the usage of Baryon mode hadn't yet returned back to Naruto. But the TLDR of all of it is, if the second possibility is reality, Naruto should come back stronger than when he went into the Daikokuten. That is to say that the energy lost from Baryon mode should eventually come back to him, though Kurama wouldn't. At least so far as we know. Kurama then tells Himawari as to how much time my rebirth will take or where it will happen, no one can know. And thus Kurama never thought that he would be reborn this fast or that he would be reborn into Himawari. So even Kurama doesn't know how he ended up there. But Kurama does say something rather interesting, something I've been harping on for literal years, and says that one of the reasons I remanifested into you was possibly because when you were conceived, you were given a part of my chakra. 2 whiskers, ladies and gentlemen. Been screaming about it for years. Kurama then continues on to say, or maybe I was pulled in by the combination of Hyuga and Uzumaki blood that runs through your body. Or maybe it's fate. And this is something rather interesting that Kishimoto has been doing with his writing style in Boruto as opposed to Naruto. He's not really been explaining things, and that might just be because we're still relatively early on into Blue Vortex, but I genuinely would not be surprised if the entirety of the explanation that we got for Himawari ending up with Kurama is literally this panel. Because Naruto pulls out the Rasengan Uzuhiko, says that he's using the power of the earth, and then we never hear about it again. And while we'll probably get a detailed breakdown on how the Rasengan Uzuhiko was created in the first place later on in the manga, genuinely, if I know anything about Kishimoto's writing, this might be the most we get in order to explain how Himawari ends up with Kurama. See, Kishimoto's been going the exact opposite way of Gegege Katami. Keep it simple, stupid. Because like Kurama says in this next panel, all that really matters is that Kurama is now with Himawari. As Kurama goes on to say, either way, the results have already come to fruition. I am now your tailed beast. At which point Himawari responds by saying, I'm Himawari Uzumaki. Nice to meet you. To which Kurama responds with, it seems you've understood me well, Himawari. It's at this point that Himawari wakes up on top of a giant bird being shaken by a kid who looks a lot like Shikamaru, who also happens to be yelling at Inojin, telling this giant bird to go faster because there's a tree alien chasing them for this child. And that tree alien is looking more and more chicken-like by the second. It's at this point that Himawari begins to freak out and begins to yell at Kurama, saying, Kurama, do something. Which elicits a response of everybody from Team 10 being like, oh, Himawari, you're awake. Good. Bad news. Everything's on fire. And while everybody's saying good morning to Himawari after she woke up for her nap, she's still screaming at Kurama to help her. And it's at this point that the chicken man begins to fire up what can only really be guessed to be a tailed beast ball from his Rinnegan. I say can only really be guessed to be a tailed beast ball because there's black and white chakra feeding into a ball growing in front of his face. And we came to the same conclusion when we did our breakdown on chapter 9. And since Jura is the only one of the Shinju we've seen pull out this tailed beast ball of sorts, it kind of corroborates the idea that he is in fact the Ten Tails. That, and you know, the giant Rinne Sharingan on his chest that he and he alone has. But Jura doesn't use this tailed beast ball in a traditional sense. He more uses it like a high velocity sniper shot. And with that high velocity sniper shot, he shoots off one of the wings of Inojin's giant hawk. And birds need 2 wings. And thus the giant bird, doing a good job to not just turn into ink immediately, as I kind of assumed it would, starts hurtling towards the ground. And in this moment, Inojin, instead of deciding to draw another bird or something to stop their fall, as like he probably could have, decides listening to Chocho, who yells at everybody to grab onto her. At which point she does a human tank transformation and becomes a giant, I guess, water balloon. And Team 10 and Himawari hurtle towards the ground, holding on to a woman they hope is squishy enough to break their fall. And she is, actually. Everyone then thanks the human airbag for the save, only to realize that the guy that shot them down is still behind them. And he's monologuing, going on to say that I've told you this several times, but it's a shame I have to kill you guys because your teamwork is so good. Which, like, if you're gonna kill me, don't compliment me. That's just it's a weird mixed signal kind of thing. And in response to this monologue, Himawari once again decides to plead with Kurama for help. At which point Kurama tells her, don't take this lightly, Himawari, but the person who's supposed to do something here is not me, but you. Kurama then tells Himawari it should be obvious. Whether you make good use of my power or not is up to you. And in this moment, Jura begins to close the distance. And Himawari, who's very fresh to this whole Nine Tails Jinchuriki thing, tells Kurama, even if you tell me it's up to me, I don't know what to do. And it's this point that Kurama reveals quite possibly the most important thing that's revealed in this entire chapter to us. He says, I am aware your chakra has more affinity with mine than any of your predecessors, even Naruto, which means of the 3 previous Kurama Jinchuriki we know of, those being Mito, Kushina, and Naruto, all of which Himawari is related to at least tangentially, Himawari has the capacity to be the greatest Jinchuriki out of all of them. But why? Why is her affinity so much higher for Kurama than Naruto's or Kushina's or Mito's? I mean, Mito and Kushina were 2 of the most impressive specimens to ever come out of the Uzumaki clan. Women whose life force and chakra limits were high in a clan known for that exact thing. And Naruto comes from a situation eerily similar to that of Himawari, where he was born with whiskers because his mother was the Jinchuriki of Kurama while pregnant with him. On top of that, he was half Uzumaki as opposed to Himawari's 1/4. So how on God's green earth is Himawari a better Jinchuriki than Naruto? Well, there's a couple of possible explanations. But we're gonna save that for another video. So make sure you hit the noti bell because it's next up, baby. Kurama then goes on to give Himawari a pep talk, saying throw away those pointless preconceived notions. The most important thing to do is to believe in yourself, and if you can't do that, then all of your future possibilities will turn dark. And thus Himawari decides to take the fate of this battle into her own hands, closing the distance between herself and Jura and trying to land a kick to his face, which he catches. And then he treats her leg like a pipe cleaner. I mean, like, just immediately shatters it. We're talking like Paul George level, foot is backwards, broken leg. It's actually kind of brutal. I'm just happy she's wearing long pants. I don't want to see that happen to a child's leg. And you won't believe it, but Team 10 is pretty much immediately turned off on the idea of battle against Jura after watching this child's leg get reversed. And on the next page, we see Himawari laying on the ground like Peter Griffin after scuffing his knee, thinking this isn't possible. I can't do this. You just juiced my leg. But fortunately for Himawari, the moratorium on not fighting back against Jura has broken as Team 10, well, I guess specifically Inojin, decides to make their move. As Inojin fires off a Super Beast imitation scroll dog at Jura that he decimates with wood release, and then he continues with his wood release as he scoops up Himawari and starts to grub a tree around her. And it's at this point that Jura gives us a little bit of exposition that you might have accidentally glossed over as it pertains to how Jura is planning on absorbing the chakra and abilities of those he wants to consume. See, because Jura tells Himawari, despite saying I'd eat you, instead rather you'll just become my nourishment in the form of this tree, telling her you won't suffer and that there's no reason to be afraid. And before long your senses will disappear and the pain in your leg will soon dissipate. Now, this is rather interesting because there's really no reason for us to believe that the tree that Jura is building around Himawari is any different than what the claw grimes built around those that they bit. Which means, in a way, the claw grimes, by biting people, were actually just looking for nourishment, and that when the claw grimes were able to bite people, the nourishment they manifested was actually probably just from absorbing all the abilities and chakra of the people they bit, of which that nourishment then manifested itself as the Shinju. Now, the reason I'm talking about any of this in the first place is because the similarity between what Jura is trying to do and the claw grimes already did is rather glaring. And if we're assuming that Jura is able to nourish himself by absorbing the energy of those in the trees, that this means that the nourishment of those placed in a tree by the Shinju probably circumvents to the Shinju instead of manifesting as a new additional Shinju. Kind of like a pyramid scheme of sorts, where the claw grimes create the Shinju in the form of the nourishment they got from the people they bit, and then the Shinju created from that continue to place more people in trees and get their nourishment to make themselves stronger. But we can't say this for certain. There's also the possibility that by nourishing himself with Himawari, he would also create a Himawari Shinju, but that feels unlikely. Now, Inojin decides at this moment in time that he's going to do his best Chris Hansen impersonation and stop this adult man from giving this child wood. And thus Inojin pulls out a kunai because clearly his scrolls aren't working, and he actually gets pretty close to Jura, but Jura just kicks him in the stomach really hard. At which point Himawari screams at Inojin to stop attacking and to tell Team 10 to stop getting dragged into her business, to which Jura agrees and says he doesn't understand their foolishness as this has nothing to do with them. But Inojin, more of a painter than a listener, grabs Jura's foot and says, let go of her right now. To which Jura responds with, oh yeah, no, you're right, I'm being weird about this. And then he lets her go. Just kidding, he impales Inojin. Like, bad, like dead bad, like Christmas tree ornament dead bad. Until I don't think he's dead, because I think there's going to be a realization that Himawari's new Kurama mode allows her to also heal people. Like either she's able to share Kurama's chakra with him, or because of the power of her Kurama's chakra, she just heals those around her naturally, or she's able to manifest something similar to the Sun Seal that Naruto was able to use to heal Kakashi's eye and Obito, which would make a lot of sense when you consider the fact that her name is Sunflower in Japanese. But like, I kind of want him to be dead. But at the same time, I don't want him to be dead because I like his character design, and if he dies, the new gen Team 10 just isn't Inashikacho. But killing a side character who is just now starting to get a little bit of development, who's also part of a storied team that's been around for 17 generations before they can actually grow into the truest form of their team, would be crazy. And like, it's a bad impaling. But Himawari, living up to be a prodigal daughter of her father, sees somebody who is like probably being written to be her love interest. Like, I'm not shipping them, but if Himawari was probably to end up with one person at the end of the story, it'd probably be Inojin. Mostly based off the fact that one of the anime canon arcs, he's like, oh, I can't use Super Beast Scroll anymore. And he has to go study under Himawari, who just paints the things that she loves, which is almost always sunflowers. And this teaches Inojin the lesson that in order for his Super Beast imitation scroll to work, he needs to love his paintings. That, you know, like this whole moment of him being the person putting his life on the line to save Himawari seems to be like hinting at the fact that they're gonna end up together eventually. I mean, like Sai and Ino ended up together based off like 2 episodes of interaction, so this is basically all you need. But anyways, Himawari pulls her dad when he saw her mom get impaled by Nagato, or more specifically the Devapath, and starts to get real upset. And objectively, if I just saw one of my down and out friends get turned into a Christmas tree ornament, I'd get a little upset too. Now, to this point, the Jura says something curious, and I can't tell if it's because it's a fan translation or because Jura's like not really a human, but he says, and my translation says this, and I quote, "Wait a minute, I read something about this. Is this perhaps what you would call aesthetics?" And I can't tell if he's talking about Himawari crying over the death of Inojin or Inojin being impaled is aesthetic, but it doesn't matter because upon the realization that Inojin now has an ace-size hole in his chest, Himawari breaks out of her tree binding to the surprise of Chocho, Shikadai, and Jura. And we see in the explosion of Himawari breaking out of this tree, massive dark tendrils extending beyond the barrier of the explosion. And it's at this point that we see, for the first ever time, Himawari's Kurama mode. And she looks so sick, literally shaking with excitement. I wish I was making this up because here's the thing, man. Not only does she technically have the eyes of Baryon mode Naruto with the winged mascara look, but her 2 whiskers become significantly more pronounced. On top of this, she doesn't manifest a chakra mode or any tails. No, instead, like her grandmother, her hair splits into 9 sections. And with the reveal of this mode, she stands off against Jura and says, "I told you to stop." And we get a full-page panel of this new mode. And yes, just like her grandmother, the fiery habanero, instead of tails, she manifests hair, I guess. But before you go, oh, it could be way cooler if she had like a chakra cloak and tails. No, it wouldn't be, and I'll tell you why. See, people have been trying to liken this mode to Naruto's first ever Kurama mode. The one he manifested against Haku, the one he manifested in the Valley of the End. A Kurama cloak that wasn't necessarily a version 1 cloak, but was still Kurama's chakra leaking out and helping Naruto. But these are not the same thing. See, what you have to realize is that Naruto was accessing like 1% of Kurama's chakra in that moment. And while 1% was enough to make him an equal match for the version 2 curse mark Sasuke or Haku, that would not get Himawari through this battle. And what's important to note here is that Kurama is not sealed inside of Himawari. Kurama himself has already admitted that they are of one mind and one body. And since Kishimoto is trying to downscale the action in Boruto to make it more realistic, more ninja-like,
he's taking a more direct influence from Kushina than he is from Naruto.
See, because while Kushina was never shown in the manga or the anime manifest anything resembling a version 1 or a version 2 cloak, in Minato's one-shot it was revealed that she was able to do both of those things. And thus we know now that technically Kushina could tap into Kurama's chakra by using the 8 trigram seal. In short, Naruto was able to open the 8 trigram seal and access a chakra mode that neither Mito nor Kushina could even have dreamed of using, KCM 1 and 2. The existence of a chakra cloak and the tails might actually imply that Naruto was inefficient in his usage of Kurama. See, because the manifestation of the Baryon mode eyes on Himawari could imply a couple of things. The most important possibility being that the Kurama that is remanifested inside of Himawari is a remanifestation of the higher energy form created through Baryon mode, and that Himawari's lack of a chakra cloak could actually speak to her using Kurama's chakra more efficiently, as Kurama's chakra and her chakra both exist inside of her, not outside, and thus the lack of tails and a chakra cloak could actually mean she's more efficient and more suited for Kurama, which Kurama has already stated. And thus while this Kurama mode might look more similar to Naruto's first Kurama mode, the seeming lack of a chakra cloak on the outside of Himawari's body implies that it's actually closer to Naruto's last Kurama mode, which would explain why Daemon was excited by her mere presence. Because what we might be looking at is a recyclable, reusable version of Baryon mode existing in Himawari, a higher level of Kurama's energy being reformed in Himawari that is constantly clashed against her energy, but inside of her own body, as they exist as one. See, while Naruto had enough chakra and Kurama had enough chakra to brute force nuclear fusion, Himawari might be a representation of what humanity could dream of achieving one day: cold fusion. See, because while nuclear fusion usually requires superheating two energies under a massive amount of pressure that results in a magma that burns 10 times hotter than the sun, and is therefore not only incredibly difficult to contain, but also incredibly difficult to use, Himawari's one body, one mind approach with Kurama could truly result in something akin to cold fusion, a perpetual and heightened level of energy that is not only reproducible, but also easily contained. And if this is the truth, not only is it easily explainable in the fact that Himawari is the third generation of Kurama Jinchuriki in her direct bloodline, and therefore her being the best possible one would make a fair amount of sense, but it's also explainable in the fact that both her mother and father had Hagoromo and Hamara chakra, and thus Kurama, upon seeing this form awaken from Himawari, giggles to himself and says, "You finally snapped. Let's see what it's like to rampage with you." And in chapter 11, we're gonna get a Baryon mode Himawari versus Jura. Cooking! He's cooking! God, I can't even imagine what it's like to not be a Boruto fan. My God, this is what Taylor Swift fans must feel like when she drops a 20-song folk album. So yeah, good chapter. But I'm curious to hear from you guys. What do you believe is the truth behind Himawari's new Kurama mode? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Listen, I want to halt the passing of time. I hate getting older, but every month, I get more Boruto.